Welcome on the Evolve Fitness podcast. Today we have Thom on the podcast. It's in fact the third time he's coming on. We talked about PEDs, about nutrition, and now it's time to talk about peak week. So peak week is the week before a show. So it applies for competitors, people competing in bodybuilding. So it's usually 1 week, which is pretty stressful for competitors and exciting at the same time because it's the last week before the show. So it's the last few days before stepping on stage. There are a lot of things which can be manipulated. It's more or less difficult to nail peak week. There are many protocols, different coaches do different things. And it's usually, pretty stressful because many things are changing, more food, it can lead to issues, but it can also improve a lot your physique. So the goal of peak week is just to go from a depleted physique after a long prep, which is flat, to a full physique. So muscles are popping, they are like voluminous and they are filled with glycogen and water to give that pop on stage. So it's like making your prep physique alive again. So peak week is this week where you can make this change on your physique and improve your physique to present your best physique on stage, fuller, more alive, and it can improve your physique about 2-3%, but it can also make it worse, like 20%. So this is why peak week should be done carefully and with the best protocol you can try and find for yourself. So you have to either have good knowledge about peak week protocols and how things are working physiologically, or to have a good coach. So in today's episode, we are talking about peak week, about Thom protocol, like what he uses for his athletes. We discuss about our experiences about peak week, about my experience about peak week, because I tried different protocols for my last prep. We talk about changes you can do. We give example. So this is why this podcast can bring you some nice information, because Thom is giving numbers, examples, so you can understand it better. It's not like just broad and abstract concepts. It's like examples, number, and it details his protocol in depth. We talk about mechanism, how it works, what you have to avoid, mistakes that are done during peak week. So I hope you will enjoy this episode. It's a big episode, but full of good information. I think it can be very useful for you if you're a competitor and if you want to nail peak week. So that's it for me. Let's dive in.
Peak week's the thing that people look forward to, right? Like they're always talking about in the prep and like peak week time, I'm really excited for it. I think often the psychology around there is the fact they actually anticipate eating for that. I have quite a lot of clients that will be like 6 and 8 weeks out, sort of messaging me foods that they've bought for their peak week. I thought I'd get some cookies in just in case. So there is that kind of like anticipation and excitement around it, but it's really just about presenting the best possible physique for a certain time window. And that could be for a photo shoot. I actually was helping a friend peak a client for a photo shoot just this past weekend, because it was his first time doing it. And he knew what to do, but he just wanted like a sense check almost. So a lot of that comes from like experience, right? How to peak somebody. But you can absolutely peak yourself. I mean, you're going to have to trial it, particularly if you're coaching yourself. And there are some kind of like general rules of thumb. And then it's like knowing how to make subtle adjustments. And I think that's where you have to divorce yourself from this psychology of like I get to eat or I get to have treats or the cheat meal or loading up on cookies or some bullshit like this, because actually you need to be sort of analytically looking at your physique and understanding what needs to happen, what food you need to put in, or what salt or what water or fats even to kind of bring your best look. So you want to look amazing for your photo shoot. You want to look perfect on stage. And the caveat with both is that you've reached a certain body fat percentage where you're sensitive enough for food inputs to have a cosmetic effect.
Yeah.
Okay. You're too fat, for want of a better word. If your body fat percentage is not lean enough, then food inputs won't normally yield a favorable cosmetic effect.
Yeah. So first you have to be completely peeled, and then it's worth to do a peak week.
Probably quite peeled, I would say. In the photo shoot circumstances.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But in these cases, generally the peak week, as it were, is a much more moderate protocol. When the
Absolutely. Yeah.
athlete is extremely lean, that's when you start talking about more extreme numbers. And when the athlete is extremely large and lean, it's even bigger numbers and even more sort of noticeable cosmetic changes. And
Yeah.
those inputs, a smaller athlete, a smaller input will yield a cosmetic change. So, and then I guess if not everybody's understanding what those inputs are, it's essentially your carbohydrates, whether that's to sort of store glycogen, so carbohydrates eaten a certain amount of time before you're going to present the look, so they can be digested, bond with water, and fit into the muscles, fill out the muscles. But then there's also sort of on the day the impact of what sugar's going to do to your look in terms of maybe the pump, vascularity, and things like that, with the combination of salt and sugar, or salt, sugar, and fluid. So then there's also fats. So a lot of people wouldn't necessarily understand that the muscle also contains fat, intramuscular fat stores, and those will be completely depleted, more or less, if you've become exotically lean. So those need replenishing as well. And you also want the muscle to look hydrated, but you don't want any of that fluid to kind of spill over into subcutaneous fluid retention. And that's really hard to do in an exotically lean athlete. It's very, very hard to actually overcarb them to the point that they'll hold fluid under the skin, because fat cells typically hold fluid.
Yeah.
Of fat cells, that's very hard to do. Normally, where you see someone look soft on stage, it's actually diuretic use, where they've essentially dehydrated the muscle. It's not pushing against the skin, and that's where I think that you see this sort of softer, more watery look. You absolutely can overcarb somebody for sure, but it's just hard to do in very lean individuals.
Yeah, but I would say it really depends, because for me, when I prepped, I try different protocols because I'm my own coach. So I have this luxury to be able to try different things and see how it goes. And it was also my first competing season. So no past experience about peak week, about anything. So I searched a lot. I found different protocols. So I was like, you know what? I'm doing 5 shows. So let's try each show a different protocol. So like the first one, it was a warm-up show. So I just didn't do anything. I just stepped on stage like that. I was still dieting because I wasn't planning to do this show. I was still prepping. And I just stepped on stage. Nothing, no peak week, no carb load, nothing. Then I tried a front load. Then I tried a linear loading. And finally, I did the Scott Stevenson protocol. So like the first 2 shows was the same weekend. So it's like 4 different protocols I tried, like nothing, front load, linear loading, and Scott Stevenson protocols. And I was natty at this point, but I was peeled. I was completely shredded, and the whole time. And I really figured out that when I do a peak week, at least the protocols I've done, so some are more aggressive than others with carbs, but no diuretic use, I was still drinking fluids, like consuming salt, and just some were a bit higher in carbs than others. And like higher means like 400 grams. And I was still like, for some shows, I felt like I was a bit spilled over, and like my best look, in my opinion, was during my warm-up show, because I didn't do any peak week protocol, and I was like super detailed, like everything was very thin and I could see every single detail. And it's something I've lost when I did some peak week protocols.
So, so we'll give you a general overview of how I would start to think about peaking a client, and they need to be lean to exotically lean. The degree of or how aggressive I'm going to be with the approach will probably be dictated by how lean they are, and also how long they've been dieting for. So if it's like the first time and they're lean, hopefully they've got lean in early enough that you've at least done one little carb load just to see how the look responds to, say, triple their normal carb intake. To see what happens there, and maybe add a little bit of fats in, but not really in the kind of the run up to the actual prep. We just want to see what carbs do. So the individual's going to be sensitive to food inputs, and I probably don't want them to be really in a deficit anymore. I want them to actually start filling out. So initially at the start of the week, protein will probably remain around the same. They'll still be training to some degree. Carbohydrates, depending on where they are, might drop. If they're already on very low carbs, all I'm going to do at that point is increase fats to what I would anticipate will maintain their weight, more or less. So they're sort of maintenance calories. And we can look back through the data. But then we also know that we're dealing with like a smaller, more sensitive human being. But okay, and we can be a little bit less aggressive later in the week. So we might start off with one pretty high fat day. And if their weight climbs, then I might pull the fats down the next day. If it stays the same, I'll just keep them the same. If their weight drops, then I'm probably going to give them more fats, and I might also include a little bit of carbs that day.
Mm-hmm.
So the main aim of the first sort of part of the week is really to make sure that they're super sensitive to the carbs that we're going to be putting in later in the week. And most of the amateur shows tend to be on the Saturdays.
Yeah.
Right. So we'll do it as like a Monday to Friday or a Sunday to Friday approach. So we might have 3 days where we're starting to load up the fats, and the carbs will remain quite low. I don't really play around with their food sources, and those fats are going to be easily digestible. So I'll dictate those. Some might be a little bit fun, like some dark chocolate, but mostly it's going to be things like peanut butter, avocados, whole eggs, coconut oil, stuff like that, just to fill up those intramuscular fat stores. And in that period, their fluids will pretty much be the same. They'll have been on relatively high fluids because they're in prep. Everybody's thirsty in prep.
Yeah.
They'll also have been on relatively high sodium so that they don't get into that hyperdiuresis where it's literally drinking and pissing all the time because you don't really have anything in your muscles to kind of hold on to fluids. You need to really kind of push your sodium high. But then we're going to get to sort of around the midweek mark, say Thursday. And I want to give enough time for glycogen to actually synthesize and fill the muscle. And I don't want them to use too much of that while training in their final sessions. So we're probably not going to train legs the back end of that week.
Yeah.
We're probably not going to do a huge amount of volume. But we do want to drive some hyperemia, so blood into the muscle. That's going to be good for nutrient partitioning. So then we're going to start putting in carbs, and that Thursday is probably going to be my most aggressive day because if I spill them, that's when I can tidy it up. So, and actually, I might purposefully spill them because I want to know that they're loaded up. So that'll be a really high carb day. And whereas previously they would have been on probably high fiber carbohydrate sources, they'll be predominantly white now. So lots of white rice. If they're fine with bread items, sometimes include some plain white bagels. But a large proportion of that will be rice or baby rice, rice milk, those kind of things. Just that they're fast carbohydrates and they digest well, and just enough fiber to keep the digestive transit time going well. With pretty much all of my female athletes at this point, they're constipated.
Yeah.
So laxative will be deployed. I mean, the food volume is just not high enough to really stimulate peristalsis. So yeah, so then you've got Friday is probably going to be a more moderate carb day, sort of topping them up.
Okay.
But fluids are going to be driving up on those days. So probably starting Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, incremental increases in fluids. So that Friday really is a lot of water. And I'll also probably have sodium very high on the Thursday.
Yeah, with carbs.
With all the carbohydrates. The sodium will drop down a little. With fewer carbohydrates, the fluids will go up. And on the Saturday, sodium will be quite low. And I will keep fluids in, but they'll be fairly minimal, probably 250 ml per meal.
Okay.
All right. So the idea is that diuresis is super high when they go to bed on the Friday night. They're topped up nicely with carbohydrates. They're not going to wake up spilled. They're going to wake up dry. And I think at that point as well, it's where you might consider deployment of diuretics, like very, very small amounts. And these can also just be natural diuretics like dandelion roots, with vitamin C, classically. Caffeine can be a really good driver of diuresis as well. If the athlete's not been abusing caffeine too much, and I think as a coach, you need to watch that through prep, because you do want to be able to bump them from say 300 milligrams to 600 to drive that additional diuresis on show day.
Okay.
So, that's not assuming they're not too sensitive to caffeine as well.
And for steps in cardio, how do you manage that through peak week?
I would take cardio out. I mean, what I don't want to do is cause digestive distress. So keeping cardio in just means I need to feed them more. They should be safe already. So cardio will get removed as an input. Absolutely. I also think that a lot of the inflammation and the loss of detail in the legs isn't just from training. It's from all of the excessive cardio. So things like the stair mill can be quite attritional. Even the bike, if they're going hard at it. And then steps are great for gastric motility and general health, but I would start to taper those down. So normally in a plan, it'll say at the start of the week, 12K steps, light training session 1, X amount of carbs, fluids, sodium, magnesium, creatine. And then those will just get adjusted through the week, but steps will drop down. Posing will increase towards the end of the week as well. So I'll have them posing instead of training. Also helps with the nutrient partitioning, but also just when they're a little bit fresher, they're not trained all the time, they've got a bit of food in them, it does allow them to refine some of the posing and actually feeling the muscles when they're full. It's quite hard to pose when you're very flat.
Yeah, it is. It is. Okay, because for me it's the same. For all my different peak week protocols, I was always doing this way, like high steps at the beginning and then dropping them down. And for training, I was like doing kind of a push pull legs, kind of like I was training legs on Wednesday, my last leg training, to prevent any inflammation or stuff around legs. And I was just doing kind of deload volume and just getting a nice little pump. That's it.
Yeah.
And then Friday, nothing, just posing.
So, I mean, a also, when we think about like muscle repair, if you've really damaged a muscle, we've been damaging it effectively overtraining because we've been under eating for weeks on end. That's why one of the most wonderful feelings is the few days after the show where you've actually got plenty of food in you, and the muscles actually start to repair and swell up and rebuild, and you have pumps like you can't imagine.
Crazy
So,
pumps.
so, and then, I mean, it takes about 9 days for muscles to completely repair. So there's a strong argument for deload weeks being the weeks that you grow your best in.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just an interesting thing to extrapolate then onto your peak week. So if you remove a lot of the tissue breakdown that you have been doing and start to increase food, you're going to have this healthier, drier, less inflamed, fresher look to the tissue as you normally get through a deload week. Normally you look your best about 2 sessions back from a deload week, I find, because you've started to push the blood into the muscles again, but everything is still super dry. It's not inflamed. It's nicely detailed, and you really get a good look at where your physique is at. So we've got the same thing going on in peak week there, I think. So we can probably break this down into like some numbers, just for example of people. So we're going to take an athlete, and we're not going to fix a weight or anything like that, but we're going to put some numbers in place to give people an idea of how you might stagger things, right? So throughout the week, protein's going to remain consistent right up until your high carb days, just to remove some food volume. It's not necessary at that point. And on show day, protein will be 0.
Yeah, you don't need it.
No, it's just going to affect your waist. So,
Yeah.
so we're going to go in on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, protein exactly the same as it's been throughout the diet. Depending on where carbs are at for the athlete, we're going to pull them down or keep them the same if they were already really low. But what we are going to do is we're going to push a lot of healthy fats and a variety of healthy fats as well. So we do want something like coconut oil in there, just to really directly fill up intramuscular triglycerides. We do want some avocados. There's also that nice aspect that they contain fiber. So that's going to help with the GI transit. We'd probably use something like extra virgin olive oil, peanut butter, and whole eggs if the athlete still tolerates eggs at that stage in the diet, because they can often have overeaten them and started to develop an intolerance. Maybe a few eggs, but nothing too crazy. Maybe some dark chocolate as well. So that might comprise 2,000 calories. So maybe 200 grams or so of fat.
Okay.
And if you think maybe the athletes are a large enough athlete that they're on 200 grams of protein, that's going to put them on about 2,800 calories, which will probably be enough to maintain that athlete.
Yeah.
All right, that's going to be a sort of a 90-kilo athlete. So if you're dealing with a girl who's weighing less, just pull that down. If you're dealing with a male who's weighing more, there's not many of them, you can probably afford to push that up a little bit. And in the larger male, you'll probably have some calories coming in still from carbs. In the smaller female, it's very unlikely there'll be anything in other than vegetables.
Okay.
So those days completed, fluids nice and high, maybe around the 5-liter mark. Salt nice and high, maybe around the 6 to 8 gram mark. Magnesium should be consistent. Creatine should be consistent at this point. Now we're going to go into some carb loading. So we'll probably pull down protein around about 25%. So if they're on 200 grams of protein, I'll put it down to about 150 for those 2 days. So this is Wednesday and Thursday. Friday, we're probably going to do the same thing again. So the protein's now been reduced and the carbohydrates are going to go high. So in this athlete, I'm probably going to go in hard on the Wednesday, 800 grams of carbs, really fill them out. I'm going to bump the salt up If they're on 6 to 8 grams, probably move that to 8 to 10 grams. And I'm going to bump the fluids up from 5 liters, say, to 6. The next day, I'm going to probably pull that sodium back down to the 6 to 8 gram mark where they were, but increase fluids further. So 7 liters, and bring carbohydrates down. So in all likelihood, if the athlete's looking very full, even slightly spilled, I'll run something like 600 grams of carbs.
Okay. Yeah.
If they're still looking flat somehow miraculously, then I'm going to have to adjust. I'm going to have to keep the salt high as it was. I'm going to have to keep the carbs high as they were, but I will still increase fluids. So we're starting to look at really driving diuresis there.
Yeah, and like many people forget that carbs are passing through the enterocyte, like they are absorbed with salt. Like you need salt to transport the carbs, and then you need water to store glycogen. So
absolutely,
you need salt and water.
And you're going to need more water in order to actually be in this state of diuresis, like strong diuresis as well.
Yeah.
So we want to store everything and still be pissing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now on the Friday, this is going to be a case of just topping them up. Activities probably reduced just posing 6,000 to 8,000 steps a day. And then they're maybe going to need, in this example, around 400 grams of carbs just to top them up. And water's going to go up to about 8 liters, which is a lot. They're going to have to really focus on that. I would allow the athlete to use squash, like drink flavorings and things like that. If they're using artificial sweeteners, try to keep it towards a sucralose base, or at least drinks that they've been having regularly. So if they've been drinking Pepsi Max and they want to take 2 liters of Pepsi Max as part of their fluids, absolutely fine. No issues there. But the fluids are going to go up maybe to that 8 liter mark. The carbs are going to come down to that 200. So you see, we've gone like 800, 600, 200. We've gone up in salt and fluids. Then we've gone down a bit in salt and fluids as the carbs come down, fluids go up. And then this day, salt will be relatively low, maybe 2 grams, 2 to 4 grams. And this is where the really high fluids are in place. And then pre-bed, we want them really on point for the stage. If they've had no issues with bowel movements, okay, we can leave that alone. If they haven't had a poo for 3 days, then we're going to use a laxative, just an over-the-counter one. And then how are we going to dry them out a little bit more, drive some additional diuresis? It might be a small deployment of a diuretic like Diazide. There is a risk there of flattening them out. This is even the case if you use dandelion root, vitamin C. But there's, I believe, a product on the UK market called Peak Max.
I don't know this one.
It's got a variety of herbal diuretics in it, and it's gonna. So this is something that you can just use to drive additional diuresis. It's just a good one-stop product. And then you're going to have to see how they wake up. If they are perfect and bone dry and they're on stage at 9 a.m., you're golden. But if they're on stage at 6 p.m., you're going to have some real difficult negotiations. And if they're going to go on stage multiple times through the day, or their photo shoot is at 2 or 3 p.m., then you're going to have to sort of manage that quite closely. If they wake up ever so slightly spilled over, they're probably going to dry out through the day because they're not going to have any going in. And if they wake up flat, you've got a bit of a problem, because depending on what time they're on stage, you'll only be able to get a certain amount of food into them. And you need to start leaning on sugar, really, at this point. It's as simple and easy to get into the system as possible. So absolutely no protein. I'd probably start them off on the day with a carb and fat meal that's fairly simple. So classic rice cakes, jam, banana, peanut butter. maybe not banana, depending on the individual. And they might even have like a small meal with some chicken in it and some rice cakes at some point. Also, for a little bit of satiation, but we're really talking about like 100 grams of chicken or something like that. Not a whole lot. And then as the show is approaching, it's going to be more just rice cakes and jam, no fats. I'll use something like a Lucozade Sport, like a carbohydrate drink.
Like
Um,
Gatorade?
yeah, with each meal, about 250 mil.
Mhm.
So we're making sure that they don't get overly dehydrated. But because the diuresis was so high the night before, they've pissed everything out.
Yeah.
Um, I know some coaches go with zero fluids on show day. I've never
Mm.
found that bring my best look. And
Yeah.
in terms of managing thirst, I just give them chewing gum, you know, because when diuresis is super high, thirst signaling is also super high.
Of
But
course.
chewing gum that massively, and it's a good tip actually post show if you're in a state of hyperdiuresis because your electrolytes are a bit wacky, you've been used to drinking fluids nonstop. This thirst signaling of drinking and pissing, drinking and pissing. If you're still drinking like every 30 minutes a week post show, I mean, you definitely need to up your sodium,
Yeah.
maybe some of your other electrolytes, but also start chewing gum just to suppress that thirst signaling somewhat.
Okay,
Anyway,
interesting.
we
Yeah.
divert back to the show. I did miss out that I will double creatine on those carb loading days.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And then the night before the show, I double magnesium, largely for the laxative effect.
Okay. And creatine too makes the muscle fuller.
Yeah, yeah. And then creatine, I'll just keep it like normal the day before of the show. And I won't bother with it on the day of the show.
Yeah.
That's just an extra thing that you have to mix into a drink and take, and it's unnecessary because you're saturated at
Yeah.
this point. So the day of the show is really just looking and saying, okay, does this athlete need a little bit more salt? Um, does this athlete need a little bit more sugar?
Yeah, for sure. And also I found out that drinking and like a drink with salt just before the pump up, it helps a lot to get a pump and vascularity.
Yeah, I mean, you can use a pump product. There's absolutely no problem with that.
Yeah, you have it already.
Add
Yeah.
a little bit of salt to a commercial pump product that you're
Yeah.
used to.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
um, but what I normally do in the morning is I give my athletes 5 milligrams of Cialis as a vasodilator,
Yeah.
and this is fairly long acting, so it pretty much covers maximal vasodilation through the show. I mean, you could push that harder with a larger male athlete. You could give them 20 milligrams; it wouldn't hurt at all.
Okay. Okay.
So deployment of a pharmaceutical vasodilator, I definitely recommend. I don't
Yeah.
recommend Viagra. It's going to give you a banging headache. It's a little bit too much. And for those of you that are a little bit worried about males, I mean, I'm also using this in females, and I have had feedback that post-show libido has been high, but
Yeah.
I, I also, I also put that down to the fact that they've had a big cheat meal,
Also, yeah.
um, off-plan meal. We don't use the words cheat meals in
Yeah.
my
Often, yeah, yeah.
coaching repertoire. We always have principles to the way we eat, but this is very, very effective. But believe me, when you are that depleted, your body fat's that low, your hormone levels, particularly as a natural, are that tanked. And as a male, your estrogen will have been suppressed before a show. We can talk about the enhanced side a little bit because this is a protocol that is strictly about the food right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I really wanted to talk about enhancement too.
Yeah, enhancement protocols and cosmetic applications of some of the steroids. So yeah, you will not be walking around with a hard on backstage. It's not going to happen. You don't need to be nervous about that. I was a funny story actually when Joe prepped me for the 2018 World Cup. One of
Mhm.
qualifying shows. It was either the Austrian National or a Diamond Cup in Austria, but the tanning was running late and they were a bit chaotic and disorganized. So it was a case of like, shit, my stage time's been moved forward an hour. And Joe was like, okay, what have you got with the pump up kit like that I sent you and everything? I was like, I've got Viagra. He was like, right, take the Viagra now. And then I got rushed into tanning, and all the bikini girls were in there naked. And I was like, oh God, nothing happened. In fact, it was so cold, I was ashamed to be.
It's cold.
Yeah. I was ashamed to be in there with the girls. I was like, oh no. So, yeah, just a little funny anecdote there. Yeah. But that's something that I use to sort of aid the pump up process, and certainly a hit of sodium and
water.
And also a pump product. It really is a good idea, to be honest.
For sure it is. Yeah. And for enhancement, like, are you stopping some PEDs before peak week, like GH or testosterone, stuff like that?
I mean, growth hormones, certainly. I mean, growth hormones it's a bit of an interesting one, because if you've got a very dry athlete who's got a nice fullness to their muscle on GH, you'll lose some of that fullness. So you might keep it in, but generally speaking, you drop that out. Maybe, I mean, you're not really using it anymore for any fat mobilization purposes once you start the carb loading process, at least. So, I mean, it clears in 24 hours. I'd probably drop it on the Thursday, or if there's still some little bit of fat mobilization that they're looking for, you might get a unit in before a fasted morning walk on the Thursday. But yeah, take it out on the Thursday, Friday, obviously show day. With testosterone, again, you know, if the estrogen's under control, the stack design was nice. You know, they've got a nice balance of testosterone to a DHT. You might not need to manipulate that at all. I've used suicide estrogen blockers. Absolutely tanked my estrogen and felt awful. I really wouldn't recommend that. It didn't bring me a drier look. It brought me a flatter look. So I'd be in favor of, if anything, tapering down testosterone while keeping DHT drugs very high. Just to kind of shift that androgen to estrogen ratio to a point where they can be super dry.
So you have more primomasteron.
I don't see any reason to take out the athlete's testosterone completely. You could certainly just drop it down to normal physiological levels. And again, we don't need a huge amount of anabolics to drive a cosmetic effect at that point. But I mean, something like Anadrol, it can be used to kind of promote that pump. I don't prefer it. I would just use Anavar, generally speaking. If the athlete's using Trenbolone for a cosmetic effect, it should be in a fairly low dose, so 50 to 100 milligrams in a male.
Per week.
Per week, yeah. And with a female, I mean, actually, Trenbolone's probably not the worst thing that you could put into your body as a female, in the appropriate doses. But again, I would just run down the Anavar route, particularly if they've run in on injectables. You know, just putting Anavar in from maybe Thursday onwards, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. That gives you a nice cosmetic look. So essentially what I'm saying is modulate estrogen downwards if you can, if you feel it's necessary. You can drive DHT drugs high, but we also need to be aware of the volume of oil that we're injecting, where we're injecting it, how frequently we are injecting it. So you can't be giving an athlete a significant amount of injectables close to showtime. A bad shot will ruin you. At least blur detail. So we're probably talking about maybe Wednesday being the last sort of
Short.
deployment
Yeah,
injectables. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
This is why I also wouldn't use short esters, because you're going to have to use them closer to the show window. Whereas in this transient state where we don't really care about the lipid profile, it's not going to make a huge difference. Then we can lean on cosmetic orals. My preference being Anavar and Winstrol.
Yeah, yeah. So like for the whole time of your prep and beginning of peak week, usual stuff with injectables, and then from Wednesday, Thursday, you stop injectables. You can switch to oral drugs, like as you said, Anavar and stuff, and also like clenbuterol, like fat burners, clenbuterol and yohimbine. Yohimbine, maybe you can stop before because like it can cause some water retention. And it's not necessary, as you say, like middle of peak week, you don't need to lose fat anymore. You shouldn't need to lose fat anymore. So you can just put it away and clean, maybe just keep it, but taper it down if you need to.
So yeah, well, absolutely with the yohimbine. And one of the things here we're looking at like what's going on with sleep quality and stress. So if they've got clenbuterol quite high, of course, it's systemic stress and it's affecting sleep. Yohimbine's massively sympathetically arousing. It's a great appetite suppressant, but that can come out when you start eating more food. And, you know, if the athlete's used to getting along with appetite suppression, I mean, they need to at some point in prep learn to acknowledge hunger and sit with it.
Yeah.
All right. Just trying to mute your hunger with stimulants all the time is not a sustainable approach. It's not going to work out. Semi-glutide, liraglutide, those kind of drugs can be used for appetite suppression. They'll only suppress appetite to a point. When you're exotically lean, you're going to be hungry. You're going to be hungry post-show for weeks, you know? And if you allow yourself to eat appetite, your stomach will be beyond capacity, I mean, in pain. We make poor food choices, and you'll get collateral fattening. So we have to stay away from this. So just simply knowing that no matter what you do post-show, you're going to be hungry. It's going to get better day by day if you're eating well, but it's going to take maybe 4 weeks.
Even more.
Better to endure that than get really fucking fat in 2 weeks and then maybe get into like a binge sort of cycle where you're like, no, I need to mini cut. Can't because, you know, psychologically you're just burned. Binge again. Yeah, this often happens. So clenbuterol, if it's high, I'm definitely going to taper it down.
Yeah.
But there's also this awareness that the athlete is highly fatigued. So if they're used to running around on 160 micrograms of clenbuterol and you drop it to 0, then they're going to feel like a bag of shit and exhausted the next day. So ripping out caffeine, ripping out because it's, you know, you want them to not have energy drinks, ripping out clenbuterol because you don't want them to have so much sympathetic drive can sometimes cause a lot of stress.
Yeah, this is why tapering it down and not completely stopping. And you can maybe even like continue a bit post-show just to normalize things a bit, like not to have, as you say, like from one big amount to 0, it's like too much of a difference between the two.
No. And as peak week goes on, you're feeding, right? So you have some fuel at last. So let's say we're on 160 micrograms of clenbuterol and we move into that first Sunday of fat loading. Now, cognitive function from a low-fat diet to a high-fat diet is going to explode. So 80 micrograms might suddenly even feel like too much.
Yeah.
Might even be able to go as low as 40. You probably want to maintain that through the week. With female, those doses might look more like 60, 40, and 20. I absolutely agree that it can potentially stay in post-show, but I'd want to get rid of it as quickly as possible just because it is such a systemic stressor.
Yeah, but like 1 or 2 weeks post-show maximum if you need it.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually, again, you know, in terms of like allowing the athlete's appetite to normalize, If you haven't been using it in prep, that's also a good time to deploy semaglutide. It's going to mitigate some of the overeating tendencies.
Yeah.
It's also going to the feeling of fullness when you use that, and gastric transit time being slower. They're physiologically prevented from overeating to such a degree.
Mm.
And the stomach's also shrunk as well. It's really hard to out-eat the capacity of your stomach post-show. And a lot of people try and not wanting to, obviously. It's a very uncomfortable position to put yourself in. And, you know, I've had athletes in tears, and, like, because they're in so much pain.
Yeah,
They've been.
post-show can be rough, very rough.
So stimulants really managing them down, but just being mindful of the fact that the athlete's fairly dependent on them at that point.
Yeah, and also like thyroid hormone, like because I was thinking about clen as you taper it down, like thyroid, I would say you just like keep it the whole time, even post-show before it normalizes again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thyroid's stable pretty much throughout the entire prep. All right, because that's just the normal adaptation. Thyroid down
Yeah.
regulates quicker in females than males.
Mhm.
So, I mean, a male might be able to diet for 8 weeks before they need to introduce thyroid. With
Yeah.
a female, I'd probably just introduce it straight from the start because their
Mhm.
thyroid regulation start after about 3 days of dieting.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So, yeah, post show, I'm going to keep that in until the athlete's eating well and hunger signaling is under control. Those are sort of my kind of caveats for okay, this athlete's now able to transition into eating for performance, you know, making good food choices. And they're probably now, that probably means now they're on enough food that when I bring them off thyroid, normal function can resume.
Yeah,
They're probably
absolutely.
400 or 500 carbohydrates going in by then, and they're not reporting significant hunger. Body composition is still in a good spot, and we're looking at, okay, we're depending on how long they prepped for, we can start to look at slowly moving into their off season.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
Absolutely.
right, they might need more downtime, like a meso that's 6 weeks of chill where you're slowly creeping food up. And then you might move into like a proper massing cycle again, where they can afford to deploy some drugs, and push food a bit harder, and stuff like that. You know, really get that training performance driving up. That's probably about 10 to 12 weeks post show, I would say. When you can really say you're in a position to have a productive massing macro cycle. I'm not
I
saying you're not grow post show, but I wouldn't be leveraging all of my tools to do that. I'd just
Mhm.
be slowly increasing food, slowly increasing my training volumes. If you're one for managing training intensity, I'm not really. I like to train at a consistent intensity. Then you might be tapering back up to your balls deep training.
Yeah, I totally agree because like also I would say but like just peak week during peak week or just after your show doing like a full blood panel to check at like your blood at your worst and then do it at the end of your recovery phase, like at the end of your post show, so you can be like 8 weeks, 10 weeks, just row again a full blood panel and check if you're completely recovered because hormones take a ton of time to recover. Also depends if you're enhanced or natty, because like
Yeah,
if you're enhanced,
I
you
was
could
just going to
replace.
say that. Yeah, I was going to say that if you're enhanced, don't do your blood work straight after your show. It's going to tell you what you already know. You took loads of shit, your lipids are tanked, and that you need to work on your health.
Yeah.
So now, in a natural individual, you're going to look at that panel, and you're going to see that your sex hormones are tanked,
Mhm.
your thyroid hormones are tanked,
Thanks. Yeah.
um, and that you're in a pretty shitty position.
Mhm.
But with a natural athlete, it may take much longer to actually reach normal. So it's good to see how bad you are,
Yeah.
and then it's good to see if you're progressing. So I'd even recommend more frequent blood
Absolutely.
work for a natural athlete. And then with an enhanced athlete, I would probably look at that post-show phase very clearly as a health phase, a deload, a period of time to normalize eating patterns, reach a body fat percentage that's sufficient for good training performance, and make sure that stress is coming down. Then they can go off their blood work, and we can see what then needs to be addressed, if anything. So we've done a nice health phase. Everything should now be closer to the ranges that we're looking for. And just remember, in enhanced athletes, we're not always looking to, or we're not always going to expect that everything's in the normal range. There is going to be this gray area of acceptable risk to. I'm a large male athlete, pushing up to open, so it's unlikely that I'm going to get the blood work back, where everything says green, normal. That's absolutely
Of
fine.
course. Yeah.
My blood work's not going to look like a healthy adult human who's not enhanced and weighing, 130 kilos. So, but we go, okay, well, this is acceptable. There's no like real imminent health risks. We can
Yeah.
assess where we want to continue to take risks. We might look at that blood work and we might say, you know what, we really need to take some significant downtime here. You've competed for 5 years. You've never even come close to a TRT or a health phase. You've just been pushing and pushing and pushing. And you might even need a year of downtime. They can still make improvements to their physique. I have many older males now on a polypharmacy model where they're on 200 milligrams of testosterone as their only anabolic, and they are flying. They feel great. They look great. The caveat there is, they've been doing these things a long time. Their food is on point. Their training's on point. Their sleep's on point. They've
Yeah.
also got a certain amount of muscle mass already. So, yeah. Definitely a health phase post show. For natural athletes, this is much more tricky territory
Yeah.
because,
Especially for
you know,
females.
yeah. Well, for females, often I think coaches have this mindset was that we need to restore the menstrual cycle as quickly as possible. No matter how fat, that means you get how quickly.
Yeah.
I would still follow the approach of eating well, bringing food up over time alongside training performance so that body composition stays in a fairly good spot, but really focusing on pulling stress down, really focusing on improving sleep quality, because it's not just the fact that the body fat percentage is low, it's that the athlete is under immense stress. And I've got a lot of girls now whose menstrual cycle returns relatively quickly while still at what I consider to be very low body fat percentages, simply because of the reduction in stress.
Yeah. Yeah. Stress is a big factor for loss of menstrual cycles and
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. And do you think there is like a big difference for peak week protocols between natty and enhanced? Like, can you push more, like be more aggressive for enhanced athletes? For example, with
I,
carbs and stuff.
yeah. I mean, well, pound for pound, they're going to be bigger. They're going to need more carbs.
Yeah.
The anabolics increase nutrient partitioning. So you're going to see the impact of those carbs more quickly. You can, if you're brave enough, leverage insulin carb loading. Probably wouldn't do that very close to the show. But if that athlete's going to take in 1,500 grams of carbs on the Thursday, then a rapid insulin, not a rapid insulin, a baseline insulin.
Ventus.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this is not going to, even if they do spill over a little bit, you can say, well, let's just give them a day to dry out. They're going to come back in line. They were lean enough. So, yes, there are some things that you can leverage. As a natural, there's absolutely nothing wrong with utilizing something like berberine. to enhance your nutrient partitioning.
Mm-hmm.
We might consider the fact that we've not been eating a lot of fats when we start fat loading, and maybe take ox bile to help break down those fats and utilize them. So it doesn't all need to be like on the banned list, but we definitely want to prop up the athletes for maximum nutrient partitioning.
Yeah.
We don't have all the tools for natural. But I don't prefer or really approve of natural bodybuilding in its form. To some degree, I don't really agree with open bodybuilding in its form. I'd love it if you were tested to a certain hormonal profile, like you had certain tolerable limits. I know everybody responds differently, but this is the same at the Olympia, but it would be great if like TRT was kind of standardized,
Yeah.
because we'd have a lot less post-show issues
Oh, yeah.
if everybody just ran a TRT polypharmacy model.
Yeah. Like replacement, even for thyroid.
Yeah, exactly. And then, when you're at a spot where your body composition and food consumption is in a place where you can remove those inputs, then great.
Yeah. Yeah. Because like for natty prep, I really feel that it's unhealthy, like at a certain degree compared to enhanced ones, because like you cannot replace anything. And then you just like you're super low, your body's not responsive at the end because you have crashed hormones, like everything is feeling super low. So
And then, you've got this kind of concept that pro bodybuilding is where the heavy drug use is. No, this is where the heavy genetic outliers exist. These are the guys that respond well to lower doses of drugs. They also respond very well to hypertrophy stimulus, no matter what bullshit they do.
yeah.
They also respond very well to food. But when we move more into the kind of the amateur realm, that's where people are trying to force a look, force a physique through unsustainable anabolics use. That's probably where you see more force feeding, stomach distension, and things like that. It's probably where you see more diuretic use, because they'll confuse being fat for retaining fluid.
Yeah.
You'll see more like anti-estrogen type drugs deployed as well, because it's kind of more in the bro field.
Yeah.
Take your estrogen blockers. Try taking a suicide estrogen blocker and dropping your testosterone. I have, and I ended up crying at a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. Your hormones are out of whack when Jean-Claude Van Damme, in one of those kind of montage scenes, the music's building up, he drops into the splits, he uppercuts his opponent in the nuts, you break down into tears. Something is seriously wrong. So,
Definitely.
when we're in that amateur field and they're exploring and trying to push the boundaries of their genetics they don't really have, I think that's where we often see bodybuilding is very unhealthy. And in pro bodybuilding, we have seen more deaths since COVID. We've seen more deaths generally in athletes, and they've all been cardiovascular related. But there's also the kind of the diuretic use and the dehydration of very large bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably also probably the risk areas when you come to enhanced bodybuilding. It's probably aggressive or excessive diuretic use. Diuretics may not really be necessary at all if the athlete is properly lean and peaked properly.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's quite common I've seen protocols written for females that involve diuretics from 4 weeks out, and fluids cut while on diuretics from 3 to 4 days out. I mean, this will damage your kidneys.
Yeah,
Have
it's
long
extremely
term. If it
dangerous.
doesn't, if it doesn't kill you, and then throwing your electrolytes out. So just to be clear, like some diuretics will deplete you of sodium.
Yeah.
Uh, they'll also deplete you of potassium.
Mm-hmm.
If your body's completely depleted of potassium, your muscles start to cramp, and the last muscle to cramp is going to be your heart. You'll have a heart attack.
Yeah. It's what happens.
Unfortunately, yeah. So I think that there's probably an argument for a middle of the road approach. And that's where I think that having classes like bikini, having classes like classic physique really open things up, because you definitely don't need as much drugs to be competitive on those stages with maybe not such good genetics.
Yeah, it's way more accessible. It's not extreme. You don't require extremely like big muscle mass and high conditioning. You can be great with like bikini athletes are not extremely peeled. It's not the look, so it's more accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. But within this space, you'll have men's physique athletes using more drugs than open guys. Some open guys will be using a lot of drugs.
Yeah.
Some won't be using that much drugs. There's this whole kind of genetic component,
Mm.
and also like history of usage comes in. So if you always used a lot, you're going to need to always use a lot to some degree. If you know, never used a lot, never dieted particularly, spent 5 years just growing, built your physique, you maintain your physique on very little.
Yeah. It's easy to maintain.
So you can have a competitive physique where, yeah, okay, for competition preps, you might deploy a little bit more DHT derivatives and some cosmetic drugs. Maybe even you do 4 shows a year, but it's still in terms of like your total weekly dose, averaged out and everything, something that like you can make a career out of. If your drug deployment to get on stage is something that you can't make a career out of, I think you really need to question your approach,
Yeah.
and whether bodybuilding's for you. Because in this world of like social media, you can have a marketable physique and not go on stage. You can be very, very successful. There's absolutely no need. It's not like a badge. You don't need to compete.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lots of people have been training a year. Yeah, I'm think I'm going to compete soon. I think it's time. And like, what's the benefit? Like, they don't know the cost. That's the issue. The cost of health, cost psychologically, the cost to relationships potentially. If you're not used to prepping the first time you do it, like that can be fairly damaging to the people around you.
Yeah, it can. It's even for you, like some people are either with bad coaches or they're not doing the proper thing and they really suffers like the whole prep, like they don't really enjoy the process anymore. And I think it's a shame because like competing is just you spending money and a lot of money. You don't earn anything except if you're a pro and you're one of the best pros and you have sponsors or you win shows. But if not, you don't win anything from competing. So it just should be something which is enjoyable and for yourself, like just enjoying the process. So if you hate prepping, like it's a bit a shame.
Yeah. And I mean, I think always the goal when you are building a physique, building a marketable physique, if you want to make a living out of it, it's probably to transcend bodybuilding. There's not a huge amount of money just staying in that purely in that lane. So maybe your social media will direct people to an online coaching business, to if you're widely enough followed, so maybe it could be merchandise, all the
Yeah.
way up. There's a couple of guys that stand to mind that really transcended bodybuilding, like Arnold Schwarzenegger,
Hmm.
Chris Bumstead.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, I mean, I think he makes a post and has 3 million likes. I mean, that's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and
In terms
everybody
of,
knows him. Everybody
yeah,
like
they know more people know Chris Bumstead than any other physique athlete. I am
yeah,
sure of it.
yeah.
Absolutely sure of it. If you asked the average person if they knew anything, like who's Mr. Olympia, I think the one answer they might get, they might say Chris Bumstead. I think they're very unlikely to say, it was Big Ramy or the current Mr. Olympia, the Iranian guy. His name
Yeah,
slipped my
I have a blank too.
Hadi.
Yeah,
Hadi.
yeah.
So how is Hadi Chupan not in the forefront of my mind as easily as Chris Bumstead? And I'm very switched on to bodybuilding. I enjoy following it a lot.
Yeah. It's just not
So
as marketable and on Instagram.
yeah. So yes, we talked about peak weeks and peak week strategies and things like that today. It's also nice to delve into the fact that prep is it's hard. It's generally better under the guidance of a good coach. It might be worse under the guidance of a bad coach.
Mm-hmm.
So I would definitely recommend that all people bodybuild for a number of years to build adequate muscle mass that they can be competitive on stage in their chosen class. So for some classes, that might just be a couple of years. If your frame is only going to suit open bodybuilding, that might be more than 5 years. But
Yeah.
really learn bodybuilding and build your physique before you start to think about prep. Within that time, of course, work on your posing, work on your presentation. It's all part of you can use your social media, you can build that up. You're building a marketable physique. And actually understand to some degree what a prep should look like. Listen to podcasts, read, learn about the principles of dieting, learn about the principles of hypertrophy, what's going to work, what's not going to work, and kind of divorce yourself from a lot of the noise that we get through social media, so that when you do start working with a coach, what they say to you makes sense and your feedback to them makes sense, and it can be a successful prep first time around.
Yeah. And also for peak week, like if you have the best prep ever with the best coach ever and stuff, like peak week has to be taken with caution because it can make your physique 2% better, but it can make it 20% worse. So
Yeah, I
you
mean,
really
we're
have
always
to.
shooting for like 85, 90% of what we think the look could be at its fullest.
Mhm.
Because as you say, what we don't want to do is push beyond that and not be able to recover it. And that's also why I like the loading to be aggressive a few days out and to kind of taper in.
Mm.
As activity drops as well, the glycogen's not being depleted, doesn't need to be there. Definitely waiting till the day before the show for a carb up is a bad idea. Your
Yeah,
muscles
because
won't
if you're
be full.
spilled, mm,
Your muscles won't be full and your stomach will be.
yeah,
You
yeah.
want to be in a position where you're nice and full and dry on show day, and you can keep food very, very low because you don't want anything in your stomach. You want your waist to be as small as possible.
Yeah, this is why also you have to be careful with what you eat. Like, don't try new things during peak week. Try to stick to your usual food so you don't have like digestion disturbances and stuff like distension, any kind of bloating. It's not what you want. So, like, digestion have to be on point the whole peak week.
That's why I was sort of like right at the start, we were talking about the kind of like emotional attachments to peak week, and the idea of eating certain foods and kind of glorifying them. Eating a cake in the toilets, backstage before you go on, and stuff like that. Like, yeah, it happens, and you see it a lot, but it is not going to present the best possible physique that you've worked so hard for. Why lose it in that final week by picking inflammatory foods? So, yes, not introducing new foods particularly, but we might have to, right? If an athlete's been on a very low fat diet, we're going to have to give them fat,
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
sure they're not inflammatory fats,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
making sure that they might be propped up by ox bile to help them break down those fats is a good idea. It's a good strategy. The carbohydrates should be easily digested if you're going to give them in large quantities. And again, like on your safe foods list, but if carbohydrates have been very low, they might not have had white rice for 6 weeks. So, okay, we're introducing white rice again. We're pretty confident it's going to digest fine.
Yeah, like because it's pretty like easily digestible source, and they ate it in the past and they were digesting it well in the past. So at least it's more probable that it will be fine this time too.
Yeah. And certain foods, if they've remained in the diet, will be okay. If they've come out of the diet, they might not be okay at that stage. So, foods high in lactose, foods high in gluten, for example, which normally were tolerable within their diet. They were well tolerated at 8 weeks out, but they've been non existent in the diet for that period of time. So, really keeping it to simple to the vegetables that were in the diet already, the white carbohydrates, white rice predominantly, protein from meat and fish. Very, very straightforward. So, not playing around with the meal plan too much, just building it back out, probably from where it was somewhere in the off season if they were eating well.
And what do you think about taking digestive enzymes? Like, do you think it can help?
Absolutely. I mean, you probably want to keep a high quality probiotic in year round, like a
Mm-hmm.
billion TFU. And then for me, digestive enzymes, I mean, betaine, I do think that if you're having to use betaine to break down protein, you might be overshooting the amount of protein that you need. And certainly around that peak wheat protein shouldn't be so high that you'd need to deploy betaine. But a good blanket digestive enzyme, when larger meals start to go in, is just going to support good digestion,
Mm.
take a little bit of stress off the body. Everything down regulates, including the amount of digestive enzymes you produce. And some of them, like lactase, will down regulate hard because we're not meant to continue drinking milk past a certain age. That's one of our body's mechanisms. So if you consistently kept lactose high from a young age, you probably have no risk of being lactose intolerant
Yeah.
until you decide, because you read on social media that lactose is bad, to cut out dairy. And then 6 weeks later, when you do reintroduce it, you realize now I'm lactose intolerant. Well, you're not. Your lactase enzyme's just downregulated, and you can probably taper it back up to some degree. Yeah, it's just some of those kind of minutiaes that you need to understand through communication with the athlete, through managing their diet, through knowing their history. Helpful if you started to work with them in the off season, to be honest.
It's the
Helpful if you've
best
worked
way.
with them for several seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Very easy to peak an athlete if you've worked with them for a long, long time. You know their body well. Show to show, it's going to change. Year to year, it's going to change
Yeah.
in terms of quantities, the kind of probably the cosmetic impact of certain things. But they'll still be doing what they used to do, just to different degrees. And then there's aging of an athlete as well.
Yeah, which
But,
can change things.
yeah. But this is altogether like sometimes you just have to do a revamp.
Yeah, and like as a coach, how do you monitor your athletes through peak week? Like, how do you use pictures, or if you're in person, like when do you check them, and like do you track body weight too? Like, how do you work with monitoring?
Yeah. So normally what happens is a few weeks out, I'll build them in a provisional peak week strategy.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be based on their trajectory, the food that they've been on, and that'll be broken down by day, and that will have the expenditure, the workouts. Initially, it will just provisionally say normal protein, low carbs, high fats, and those macros will get penciled in closer to the time, and then finalized, and then they will get adjusted day by day if necessary. So, which is hard on the athlete because they are often very OCD and they want to plan everything. Well, what should I have? Lots of rice, have some honey. Like you can
Yeah.
make sure these things are in, but I'm not going to be able to dictate to you precisely until I look at you in the morning what we're going to go ahead with for that day. And then as we get closer to the show, that's where we might start to look at morning and evening pictures and weight We've always been looking at morning weight. The day before the show, we're probably going to be looking meal by meal.
Yeah.
Because at some point we're going to pull carbs, and it might be earlier than anticipated, or we might have to add a meal and hopefully be close enough to the target that I can say, okay, we're going to do half the carbs or none of the carbs planned for the final meal, or we're going to add an extra meal, or we're going to keep it the same. And on show day, it's really just constantly looking at the athlete, topping them up. But they'll have a show day timeline. If the show has released stage times, it'll be broken down meal by meal, time by time, fluids, timings, any ancillary drugs, the caffeine. They'll be having caffeine tablets with their first few meals as we drive diuresis, that kind of thing. And then, if they're flattening out fast, make sure I normally have a suitcase on hand with jam, rice cakes, Haribo, peanut butter, and Lucozade, Gatorade, something like that. And because that athlete could go on stage once and that's it, they're done. They could do multiple classes. They could progress through their classes. There could be a break in the show and they're in the finals, but it's in 3 hours time.
Yeah.
And they look perfect, but they're going to flatten out. They might need additional fluid at that point to keep them full.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So show days are unpredictable. We saw that at this year's Mr. Olympia. A lot of the top guys who are super sensitive because of their size missed their peak because I think they went on at like 10 o'clock at night. And some of them had to get eight meals in to kind of maintain their fullness and dryness. But at the same time, their midsection, they were losing.
Yeah.
You can't stay on super low food for the whole day without getting flat.
Yeah.
So if the athlete's going on stage very late at night, you can probably push their fullness a little bit harder the day before.
Yeah, so they maintain. Mr. Charlie's want to talk?
Young man, that's enough. That's a good boy. I'm very aware of the threat of nothing that you're aware of. You're a good boy. Well done. I'll take things over from here.
He wants to participate.
Always, always. He's actually been very good through this entire podcast, which is unusual.
Yeah. And for example, because I was following John G. White recommendations, and he was saying you should take pictures and weigh yourself, fasting when you wake up, then 30 minutes before each meal, and then before bedtime. And do you think it's too much and it's unnecessary to track so many times a day, or do you think it can be?
Was John talking specifically about himself or in general? Because John has a weight limit to make.
Yeah, it was in general.
Right. I would say in general, it's not necessary unless you've got a weight cap and it's the day before the show and you're close to that weight cap. I don't think it's necessary to weigh yourself meal by meal. I also, correct me if I'm completely wrong here, know how much my meal weighs.
Yeah, we don't know. Yeah.
So if I'm 200 grams under my weight limit and I eat a 200-gram meal, I would expect I'm at my weight limit. All right. Now, 3 hours from then, I might have digested. I might weigh a little bit lighter. Yeah. So again, if you're looking at weight limits, you might be weighing yourself in just to see how much volume of food. I mean, just probably carbohydrates anyway, but how much you can get away with putting in, assuming you're still trying to fill out, which usually when you've got a weight limit to hit is you're negotiating with how flat you have to be as opposed to how full you can get yourself. So no, I think in general, it's probably not necessary to that degree, but it's definitely cool to see your evening weight and morning weight, particularly if you are going into categories where there is a weight limit. You say, yeah, we put in 600 grams of carbs and X, Y, and Z today. I woke up in the morning, I was, a kilo heavier, and then by midday, that kilo was off or something like that. But I think really we're looking more at cosmetic adjustments at this point.
Okay, so all by the look.
Yeah, I'm not sure outside of like making a certain weight, if you're really close to the weight limit, I'm not sure what benefit weighing yourself has, but there's definitely benefit to obviously looking at the physique, assessing the physique, and knowing whether to add food or not add food, potentially add fluids, potentially add salt.
Yeah, because like what he's doing and recommending is like kind of linear loading, and he wants to like a long peak week, like every day is kind of looking the same. So every day pictures and body weight at the same time. And he tries to see at what time the physique is looking the best, like what you want for a show day, like to step on stage. And then he tries to reproduce this kind of protocol for show day. So like, for example, if day one, like with this amount of carb per meal and stuff, like the athlete is looking great after 3 meals and this amount of carbs and this amount of proteins and stuff, then he will try to like just do that like the same way for show day to get the same physique. So he tries out along the week, and then when he finds a look, he just reproduces it for show day. So this is when his body weight, like he's like, okay, you look great at 110 kilograms, for example.
Okay.
So let's keep the same weight for show day.
Yeah, I understand that, and then this wouldn't be applicable with my approach because one body fluctuating, and the strategy really is to make sure that the athlete's super sensitive to carbs, whilst also having nicely filled out intramuscular fat stores.
Yeah,
none of which is going to get depleted by excessively hard training or high volumes.
Yeah.
So that's really just a matter of manipulating nutrient partitioning in that peak. I don't necessarily see an issue in an exotically lean athlete with a linear load.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I also think that over the course of the week, that body's going to be changing. And so day to day, if you're I still think things would be changing. So you look great at meal 4 and this weight on Monday. On Tuesday, that might differ. And on Wednesday, that might differ. So, and then on show day, great. If the stage times are exact, you look perfect on that amount of food at 4 p.m. on Friday, and that's when you're going on stage, and boom, the show's running 4 hours late. So there's still, no matter what, an element of reactivity. And having a certain eye, and that eye comes also from knowing your athlete well. So a relatively small amount of carbs will make them pop relatively quickly, but they'll also flatten out relatively quickly. So I really want to be on point around their stage times.
Yeah, you really have to adjust because stage time can change dramatically.
Yeah. Or I have a guy who, even when he's depleted, just looks full and round. He looks nice and dry. But as I carb load him, he looks softer. If it goes too far, he might only need a little bit. So, every physique is a little bit different. There's always going to be those adjustments. But in general, what are we going to need to do? We're going to need to fill up our intramuscular fats. We're going to need to fill up our glycogen stores. We need non-inflammatory fats and easy digesting carbohydrates to do that. We need sufficient fluids to store the carbohydrates, sufficient sodium to store the carbohydrates. And then we also need to drive diuresis and probably increase diuresis by reducing sodium to some degree from a high place to a low place once the carbohydrates have been stored. And beyond that, the athlete is dehydrated, you've really only got sugar to play with to manipulate the look.
Yeah. And for example, if your athlete is spilled over, so if you carb load a bit too much and then the athlete is spilling over, so like fluid retention in the subcutaneous space, what would you do? So you cut fluids, and are you doing some kind of
that's on show day morning?
Yeah. Let's say show day morning, your athlete just wakes up a bit spilled over, and you have some time before the show. Are you going to do some cardio, for example, to just
No,
like use the carbs and stuff, or?
no. They're not going to have any sodium. They're not going to have any food. So what I'd be looking to do is flush through as much of that excess fluid as possible.
Okay.
All right. And that's where if you start using diuretics to kind of correct that spillover, you're also going to pull from the muscle to
Mhm.
some degree because they pull sodium and potassium. Really interesting. If you took a loop diuretic like Lasix and then gave the athlete sodium and potassium and fluids, diuresis would be highly, highly aggressive. Highly aggressive. They'd
Yeah.
flatten out very fast as well.
Mhm.
I wouldn't recommend that. That could be going on for more than 24 hours. It'd be a massive stress on the kidneys. But yeah, if an athlete woke up spilled to some degree, I would have them have no food, no sodium. But yeah, maybe mineral water. You know, like I'm not going to get fussy about the water that they're drinking. It's fairly negligible compared to the amount of sodium that they've been used to. But you know that they're full. You know that everything is stored inside the muscles. So you just need to
Mhm.
wash off intramuscular fluid. I mean, if hunger was like to some degree an issue, you might give them a little bit of chicken now and again.
Okay.
But if you want to get dry ever, then don't eat and push fluids.
Mhm.
If you want to look soft, then cut fluids.
Yeah. So like just stay hydrated, but reduce sodium and no food.
Yeah, I'd go for overhydration. Like I'm looking for like I would have them drinking a lot of fluid
Okay.
throughout the day, and I'd hope that they're on stage later in the day.
Mhm.
Uh,
So they have
you know,
time
like,
to just process it and stuff.
yeah. I mean, let's say that you had a big cheat meal, for example, something very high in sodium,
Mhm.
um, and you woke up soft. Fasting and flushing through with water will dry that off,
Mhm.
and you'll be plenty full. Food
Okay.
still digest.
Okay. Good.
So that would be my how I would correct that.
Good. Yeah. Do you have other things you want to touch on, or we talked about everything?
Yeah, I mean, I think that um, overall, you know, we have the principles there down
Mm-hmm.
of at least one approach to a peak week.
Yeah.
Uh, I think we've got some very good general rules in there.
Yeah.
We've got
Absolutely.
some we've got some good examples of how to react
Mm-hmm.
to an athlete flattening out under different days, kind of carbohydrates they need to be eating, kind of fats they need to be eating. And again, like everybody is going to be a different weight, process things differently. So knowing the athlete or knowing your body, if you're coaching yourself, which probably means maybe even prior to stage that you've dieted to a degree of leanness where you can have a play around. So maybe even booking yourself into a photo shoot before you do something as radical as get on stage.
Yeah, to try things out. Because also like there are many like peak week protocols. You have front load, back load, linear loading. You have your protocol, which is quite similar to the Scott Stevenson protocol I've done. Like
Yeah,
you have many different things you can do, and it all can work. Like it's like training. You have different styles of training and it all can work, but it has to be like with a logic behind and apply to each individual and the situation.
yeah. And you know, you can fluke it and think that's your peak week. Like I've been in prep where I've been peeled like 6 weeks out,
Hmm.
uh, and I've had like pizza and ice cream, and I've gone in the gym the next day and just been popping and looks absolutely insane. Um, but that happened once. Every other time I looked like shit. So, I think having like at least staying to like clean food sources, having a fairly moderate approach, not being
Yeah.
aggressive with it, not leaving it too late, being lean enough before you go into peak week, that you're not having to manipulate fluids like aggressively in some attempt to get off subcutaneous water, which is stored in fat. Which, if you don't have the fat, then it's not going to be the issue. So, yeah, if you can learn to get exotically lean before you go on stage, I think that's going to be helpful. First timers are always going to struggle, always going to struggle. But with a great coach, then they will get a first timer on stage peeled and well peaked.
Yeah.
Might not be the perfect peak, it's their first peak with a coach, but they'll be well peaked. Their look will be better than it was at any other point in the prep.
Yeah, because a good peak should just enhance a bit your physique. Like it's a little percentage. It's not crazy. It won't completely make your physique, but it will improve it a bit. So that's a good peak. Like a bad peak is just having a worse physique and stepping on stage super watery and not looking good. So you have to avoid that at all costs.
If you have this in your head prior to peak week, I'm going to dry off in peak week. You're too fat, and
Mm-hmm.
you should go in 4 weeks' time
Yeah.
or late. Just continue the diet.
Yeah, you don't peak, you just continue to diet.
You can do that show if it's like a regional, just like you did.
Yeah.
Right, you might not be in the best possible shape, but don't fuck around doing a peak week. Continue to
Yeah.
diet through that week.
Yeah.
Go on stage flat, or maybe you might have a few carbs the day before, but go on stage flat, you know, and dieted and depleted, and tick the box of doing the regionals so you qualify for the show that actually matters. Like, it's great if you can look your absolute best at every show, but I think if you structure a season
Mm-hmm.
properly, then you'll walk through the qualifiers, walk through the regionals, and then you'll be, in that very lean position for the pro qualifiers or whatever. If you win that, potentially to go on and compete for a pro card if you've got that good a physique at pro
Yeah.
qualifiers.
Yeah.
Um, there's if you want to be at your absolute 100% best for a regional show and then continue to compete the whole season, then it's very hard not to have an over dieted look. It's very
Yeah.
hard to keep that pressure. Stress is so high, the body's so depleted. I mean, even tendons and sort of ligaments, connective tissue structures can take weeks to fill out and properly hydrate post show.
Mm.
Peak week will not properly fill you out,
Yeah.
but you need to have that balance where you stay dry. But you could be filling out properly if you're eating well for 2 to 4 weeks post show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You will be looking a little bit softer, but you'll be fuller and fuller and fuller.
Yeah, it's kind of what happened to me, like because I tried to maintain my condition for like 2 months, and for the last show I was completely over dieted. Like it was too much for my body. It was just not okay. So
Yeah. And that's when you follow the approach where you depleted, fat loaded first and then carb loaded. Whereas in that sort of over dieted state, you might have even needed to start carbing up 10 days before and probably
yeah,
take carbs, um,
yeah,
you know, according to the look. So, yeah, depending on where the physique is at, that peak week approach will change. And that's a really good point, actually, probably to finish on.
yeah.
Um, over a course of a competitive season, the nature of the peak weeks might have to be adjusted.
Absolutely. And even if like you find the perfect peak week protocol for you for one show, maybe 2 weeks later for another show, it won't work the same. So you always have to adjust, even if you found the best ever protocol for you.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So, I mean, you've been through that season now. You've used different approaches, and so I imagine that you could probably pull out an approach that's more suited to where your physique is at for each show based on
Yeah.
that experience.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm not fully in shape, but it's just a regional. I'm just going to cruise through, no changes, no peak week whatsoever. Second show, I'm in really, really good condition. I'm going to fat load, carb load, follow this approach. Third and fourth show, I'm approaching being over dieted. It's really hard to fill me out. And it's probably stupid to try and deplete me, you know, 5 days out even more. I'm just super flat anyway. So, and now, I mean, you might even just have adjusted your diet to be on more carbs just to maintain the look, and then water manipulations closer to the show.
Yeah. Yeah, of course it could work. Or like reverse diet, kind of like linear loading, but even before, like 2 weeks before, just reverse diet and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. If some people post show done with reverse dieting done well, will look absolutely fantastic 2 weeks post show.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. And actually, a really good case in point, Sarah had such a long season. My client Sarah had such a long season as we did her reverse diet, which was pretty much to hit maintenance calories from week one. I think for 6 weeks, she looked better and better. Every single week, I was like, we could put you on stage again. We could put you on stage again. That was like, we put you on stage again and win a pro show, you know? Like, it was really, really interesting to see when you eat well and you reverse out from an over dieted position, how long it takes to actually then achieve sort of, let's say, the perfect look. And this is the perfect look for bikini. It's probably a shorter, more acute time window for drier categories, but still very interesting. An over
Yeah.
dieted athlete takes a long time to fill out.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're not binging like crazy.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I think that's it for today. For today's episode, we talked a lot about peak week. So I hope people can find some good nuggets in it and like manage to do their peak week the good way and not fuck things out for a show day. So yeah, peak week is pretty like complex because you have to work with a lot of different variables like carbs, fats, water, sodium, and stuff like that. But if it's done properly with a good coach, or if you know yourself super well and you're well informed, it can go super well and improve your physique. So it's worth to pay attention to that and be like with a good protocol and a good coach.
And the one take home above all of this is you've got yourself in shape. You look good. Do not fuck it up the night before by having a massive cheat meal thinking that's going to make you look better.
Yeah. Yeah. Burger and fries and vodka before a show.
Yeah, I mean, alcohol with these kind of contexts, like the diuretic effect's not really there. The vasodilation effect, nah, I don't think it's the best. Does it relax you a bit? Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe. That might be why some athletes do wake up drier because they've been hyper stressed and a glass of wine settled them down. But I don't recommend it, to be honest. I also think that in the body's super lean state, when you introduce alcohol, inhibitions on a relatively small amount of alcohol are dramatically lowered. And I think that things can go awry in terms of the diet very, very
Yeah.
easily. Give
Yeah.
someone a glass of wine when they're that depleted and they haven't had alcohol for a long time, the chances they're going to think having a pizza is a good idea are a lot higher because simply they want a pizza.
Yeah, and also a friend of mine, his coach told him to drink vodka before the show, and he had like stomach burn. Like it really caused stomach pain, like very painful and stuff because of the vodka, and he couldn't like eat, and he had some digestive issues and stuff. So a very bad idea.
Yeah, no alcohol before the show. In
No
fact,
alcohol
no
before the show.
bodybuilding full stop would be a good approach if you want to be a successful athlete.
Well, great. Thank you for your time, and see you in the next episode.
Always a pleasure. We'll speak soon.